Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Chiranjit Mishra and today I'm going to discuss the news items for March 25th News Today. There are 5 main news items, 7 quick updates and 1 place in the news, which is Lebanon. Let's quickly go through the news titles so that we can discuss each news item one by one. Okay. So as I said, there are 5 main news. The first main news is about India's strategic petroleum reserves, which are almost empty or it's not adequate enough to deal with the ongoing Middle East crisis. And then there is this, we recently observed World TB Day, tuberculosis. And even if India has not fared really very well, but the number of TB cases has come down. Then this particular news is about SEBI, which has recently released a code of conflict for its insiders. That means they cannot take part in the stock market and we need to enhance transparency. Although the code is good, but we have to look towards how well it is going to be enforced. The fourth main news is about Natural Gas and Petroleum Products Distribution Order as per Essential Commodities Act. That means we need to spread the network of piped natural gas. Okay. Again, it holds relevance taking into consideration what is happening in the Middle East. The last main news is about Thailand's decision to send back e-waste coming from the United States. Very smartly labeled as scrap materials, but essentially these are e-waste coming from the United States. So this is, we are dealing with a new situation which is called waste colonialism. Okay, very interesting piece of news. Let's quickly go through the quick updates. The first is about annual survey of unincorporated sector enterprises. That means those companies in which the owners are not separate from the companies. Okay, because there is a concept called business entity principle in which every individual is different from the company, but in this case it is not. The second quick update is about pension for women army officers from short service commission and permanent commission. We'll get to know the differences. Then Bureau of Indian Standards. So since 2014-15, how the Bureau of Indian Standards has fared, how it has performed, starting from Make in India, zero effect, zero defect. Okay, these principles have been adopted, so we'll take a look at that. Then doctrine of necessity versus right to recusal. Sometimes there is this scope for judges of the Supreme Court or the High Court to not be part of a particular bench. Okay, but that is called right to recusal. If they feel that there is a possibility that there might be a conflict of interest, so they very carefully disallow themselves from joining a bench. But if a matter is really very crucial and there is no other alternative, is it possible? Next quick update is about CERN experiment with antiprotons. Antiprotons are antiparticles of protons, and again, the standard model which we use in physics and quantum mechanics, it's still incomplete. Researches related to gravity and other materials, especially antimatter, are still being conducted, so that we can know the reason as to why antiparticles are unstable. Then Supreme Court regarding scheduled caste status, and the last news is about INVITS, Infrastructure Investment Trust by NHAI. Okay, so this is in a way you can say taking money from retail investors. Okay, the place in the news is Lebanon. Let's start. So I hope it's visible. 1/3 of India's strategic petroleum reserves are empty. So strategic petroleum reserves are just like backup fuel reserves. Okay, first we have normal PSUs like Indian Oil Corporation, Bharat Petroleum, Hindustan Oil. They have the Hindustan Petroleum. They have their own reserves from which they supply refined oil. But we also need to be extra cautious because we know that India is the 3rd largest oil importer. Okay, after China, US, 3rd is India. Okay, and 50 to 60% of the crude oil comes through Strait of Hormuz, which is now under the control of Iran, and Iran is being in a very retaliatory mode, and that is why we cannot depend upon this particular supply chain, which is linked with the Iranian Strait of Hormuz. Not Iranian Strait of Hormuz, it's related to the Middle East. So in such a situation, we should have had enough of fuel stored in the underground reserves. These are called strategic petroleum reserves. Okay, SPR, strategic petroleum reserves. Now India has strategic petroleum reserves which can support close to 6 MMT, million metric tons, and of that nearly only 60% or 64% is filled. Even if it were completely filled, the 6 million metric tons, it could have supplied oil for only 10 days. सिर्फ 10 दिन के लिए काफी होता. So let's see whether India is following the international standards, because as per International Energy Agency, which is IEA, the total oil supply should be of 90 days. Okay, but India's is 10 days through SPR. Apart from that, India, for example, PSUs like Indian Oil Corporation, Hindustan Petroleum, they have their own reserves. So together, these 10 days plus 64, I think 75 days or 74 days of total supply we have. We are supposed to have 90 days of steady supply reserve. Okay, so let's take a stock of that particular situation. Recent context: West Asian conflict disrupting oil supply routes. Current status is your, as you can see, 5.3 million metric tons. Okay, million metric tons. Metric tons means 1,000. Okay. So current storage is 3.37. So 3.37 divided by, you can say, 5.33. This is the total capacity. Into 100 kar do. It will come around 64%. So that SPR is also not totally filled. 36% is empty. And we have only 3 places where we have strategic petroleum reserves. What are these reserves? For this time, this is the ground level. Okay. यहाँ पे हम लोग रहते हैं जो करते हैं. So here we have porous caves. We use sedimentary rocks, or you can say caverns, to store oil, just like they're naturally found in sedimentary rocks. Okay. So यहाँ पे हमारे पास है विशाखापट्टनम में, I think one is in Mangalore and one is in Padur. Locations: Visakhapatnam, ye Padur, and we are also planning to have more SPRs, one in Chandikhol, Odisha, but currently 3 are functional: Visakhapatnam, Mangalore and Padur. Prelims question aa sakta, which of the following regions are known for strategic petroleum reserves? So maybe one option can be, you say Calcutta, Kolkata, or Haldia. It's wrong. Okay. So this is a very grim situation. Acts as a buffer during supply shocks used in war, and this concept of having strategic petroleum reserves started in 1973. And 1973 was, again, that year marked a war between Israel on one side and all the Arab countries on the other side. So they used oil as a trade weapon. Okay. So I think it was called Yom Kippur War, 1973. Okay. Because Israel was backed by the West versus Arab countries. Okay. Since then, countries have become very cautious. But India needs to learn here, because India is in a way suffering. So India's energy vulnerability, I said 90% of the crude oil is imported, 88% to be precise. Third largest oil consumer. High dependence means high vulnerability, okay, because we do not produce enough oil, crude oil. Okay, Bombay offshore fields are there, but they are not enough to meet the domestic demands. So International Energy Agency benchmark is 90 days, as I mentioned in the beginning. Total stock, that means SPR plus commercial, that means what the PSUs hold. Together, in India's case, it's 74. 16 days short of 90 days. Okay. Expansion plan, it's underway. Chandikhol, Padur expansion, already there is a strategic reserve, but we want to expand it. But in Chandikhol, it's going to be entirely new. Okay. And proposed but not finalized in Bikaner. So you need to memorize the names of the 3 functional strategic petroleum reserves, and 1 Chandikhol you can add. Okay. So there was a CSC prelims question, because there are 2 gas related, one gas related topic, piped natural gas, and 1 crude oil. So I thought it's good to discuss this particular question, not related to India's capacity to produce crude oil or import the volume of oil and gas that is imported, but slightly related question. It appeared in 2019, and it is related to PNGRB, Petroleum and Natural Gas Regulatory Board. The first statement is the first regulatory board set up by the government of India. Now you can know that there are so many regulatory boards, starting from the RBI. The RBI itself is a regulatory body. It was 1934-35. It was set up. Okay, pre-independence. Then we have IRDAI. Then we have Pension Fund Regulatory Development Body. NABARD. So if anybody remembers the year, it was I think in 2006. You can simply know, okay, no, it is not. Even if you don't know the names of these many bodies, you can simply say RBI, because this is something that we very easily come across as a fact. So if one is incorrect, then this is not correct, this is not correct, and this is not correct. 2 and 3 only. Moving to the next topic, Thailand to send back waste coming from the United States. So again, the developed countries, because they're not able to deal with their waste, because they have very strict rules as regards waste management. So unlike developing countries or countries like India, very strict rules. So what do the companies do? They try to ship their all sorts of waste, not just e-waste, all sorts of waste perfectly labeled, just to mislead the receiving countries that there is something inside the box, but the box contains e-waste and some other form of waste which is not acceptable in the destination country. So that is what happened in Thailand case. So they had misleading boxes in which e-waste was there, and when Thailand the stakeholders received the boxes, they found e-waste inside. Now they're planning to send it back. So this concept is called waste colonialism. That means rich countries, the US and the West, they're dumping their e-waste, and the markets for the same are like Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Okay. And there are many international conventions, for example, Basel Convention, that regulates the movement of hazardous waste. So many rules and regulations have been violated. So let's take a look at this story. You can cite this case as an example in your mains answer. If you ask me, this is important from the point of view of paper 3, environment. But international relations is also a very comprehensive subject. It can form one of the many aspects. For example, a question can be asked about the different types of new colonialism, or maybe GS paper 1. You can say West colonialism is another aspect of the domination of the West. Okay. Thailand intercepted 284 tons of US e-waste with false labels. See, false labels. So this is very misleading. Okay. That way the United States cuts a very poor figure. That means you're trying to cheat Thailand. All containers will be sent back to the US under Basel Convention. Okay. So it's a 1989 convention for managing hazardous waste. NIMBY is another concept. Just like I said, waste colonialism, not in my backyard waste disposal. That means मेरे backyard में मत भेजो अपना waste. Okay. So deal with your own waste products. Don't try to dump your waste in our country. So this is called NIMBY. People support development but reject local waste disposal, leads to exporting hazardous waste to poorer countries. So this is what we called waste colonialism. So 2 keywords today you learned: waste colonialism and NIMBY. Not in my backyard principle. Okay. Developing countries contribute less but face higher pollution burden. Okay. Violates extended producer responsibility. That means it is the responsibility of the producer to deal with the waste. Okay. If a manufacturer is manufacturing polluting materials, then once the product reaches its end life, it has to be dealt with by the producer. So here the producers are in the United States, but who is suffering? Thailand. Waste colonialism affects Asia, Africa, Latin American regions. So UN Waste Initiative targets illegal waste trafficking between regions, promotes partnerships for circular economy. Circular economy means actually focuses on reuse. Okay. So it's like waste to wealth concept. Okay. Waste to wealth. Led by UNODC, UNEP, these are the United Nations bodies involved. Basel Convention regulates international hazardous waste movement, adopted in 1989 to ensure safe waste disposal. So the story is itself, you cannot expect a question about this Thailand and United States issue, but it can be used as a context, okay, to discuss what? Waste colonialism, or how the rich countries, they're sending waste products to developing countries. Third news is about SEBI conflict code overall. That means SEBI just 2-3 days ago, it introduced or laid down its code on conflict of interest. So these days, many people invest in the stock market, in mutual funds and all that. And the regulator of these markets is the SEBI. Okay. And SEBI came into being in 1988, but that time it was not a statutory body. There was a SEBI Act which came in 1992. The body was already existing. Then under this act, it became a statutory body. Okay. So SEBI, Security and Exchange Board of India. Okay. And recently, if you remember, 2 years ago, there was a report called Hindenburg Report. And in that, there was this allegation related to the erstwhile SEBI chairperson, Madhavi Puri Butch. So, because insider information often helps certain players. Insider information, for example, if you're part of the regulatory body, maybe not the chairperson, one of the many officials, and you have certain information about how the company, how a particular company functions, or how it's going to perform in the near future, what investment is going to cause its stock prices to rise. You have this information, while the other players, normal players, they don't have enough information. That means accordingly you can buy more stocks, or you can sell the stocks if you think the company may actually experience something untoward. That means you have some insider information. Why? Because you're a part of the SEBI. So that is why, because such cases have become very frequent, it's not just about the erstwhile chairperson. There are many officials who have to maintain transparency. They should not be directly involved in the stock market. Okay, maybe they can use some other investment tools, but not directly stock market. Okay, so that is why the code was laid down recently by SEBI, which is a very strong code. But many experts are questioning its worth. The code is good, but is its enforcement or implementation going to be as effective? Okay, so that is the question. That is why this was in the news. And let's quickly go through the salient features of the new rules. Okay. So basically, it's all about transparency. And here the keywords would be insider information. Insider information, how does it affect? It disrupts the level playing field. Okay. Especially after the lockdown, India's financial market has actually suddenly experienced a boost. Many people are using apps to invest, okay, in the stock market, in mutual funds, okay. And even such a cases, so many people have put their money in these resources, and if one individual knows how the market is going to function, he is going to pull back his stocks. That can easily affect the stock market. Okay, that is why the salient features of the code are insiders and assets disclosure. Okay, mandatory disclosure of assets, liabilities, and insider status for officials, just like we had in the case of those individuals who are interested in contesting elections. As per ECI rule, you have to disclose your assets. Similarly, here you also have to show what is your wealth status, how much you have invested in which company. Okay, if that is the case, you don't deserve to be a part of. You're not eligible to hold office. Okay, that is also going to, for example, there are many, you know, these days there's a concept called lateral entry, because SEBI chairman currently he is an IS officer, ex-IS officer, retired IS officer, but it's not necessary that government officials have to lead the body. Okay, there can be also private individuals with you can say adequately strong background. So that's why background checking is very important. And one of the important aspects of background checking is insiders and asset disclosure. Investment restrictions. Okay, there are certain areas or portfolios in which you can invest, and there are other which are totally restricted for you. Officials cannot freely invest in stocks because they regulate the market. Maybe some sort of mutual funds they can invest in. Okay, which is not going to directly affect the market. But stock markets, it's totally banned for SEBI officials. Concentration on limits and disclosure, caps on investment concentration, mandatory disclosure to avoid undue influence. Okay, compliance and enforcement, monitoring systems and ethics oversight ensure adherence to conflict rules. So this is again what we are discussing here. Compliance and enforcement. Rules are good enough, but here this provision is related to compliance with the rules. Retirement and implementation, this is very important. post-retirement restrictions and phased implementation to ensure smooth transition. So there is actually a 2-year cooling period, because SEBI also can lodge complaints and it can receive replies and responses through its appellate channel. If a particular individual of particular official of SEBI was part of any of the charges, there are charges leveled against him or her. Okay, he cannot be part of any of the appellate bodies which is going to deal with such cases, at least for 2 years. Okay, 2-year cooling period. They cannot be representatives in such bodies because there will be direct involvement. 2 saal hua nahi before after they got retired, and they are being part of these complaint receiving bodies. Okay. So that's all about the salient features of the rules. The question is about their effective enforcement. Now about SEBI. SEBI was established in 1988 and given statutory powers in 1992, 4 years after it came into being. SEBI Act came into force in 1992. Headquarters are located in Mumbai. May be important for prelims. Okay. With regional offices across India. For example, all the major cities, they have their branches. Regular stock exchange like NSE and BSE. Regulates and develops securities market in India, protects investor interests. Okay. So these 2 provisions have been covered in the code. Registers and supervises intermediaries like brokers and mutual funds. Prevents insider trading and unfair market practices. These 3. Okay. Important. Next is about Natural Gas and Petroleum Products Distribution Order. This is as per Essential Commodities Act. So now the government is planning to spread the network of piped natural gas. And natural gas, as you know, contains methane. Primarily methane. Methane also constitutes 70 to 80% of biogas. Okay. Because methane supply is slightly steadier as compared to LPG supply. LPG cylinders that we're dealing with. Why? Because it contains butane and propane, and of course we import both CNG, I mean natural gas, and petroleum gas. But the import of natural gas is not that high as compared to the LPG import. Okay, because India also produces 50% of its requirements from Bombay offshore fields. Okay, and they're easy to deal with. For example, because connecting supplying gas through connected networks, it's going to be easier rather than procuring gases and filling the cylinders and all that. Okay, so this is slightly less you can say open to supply chain risks as compared to LPG. Not totally immune. Okay, that is also going to be affected because 50% of the requirements, natural gas requirements, is actually imported again from the same Middle East region: Qatar, Kuwait, Qatar, UAE, and Saudi Arabia. Okay. So let's take a look at the story. Aims to expand PNG networks and promote cleaner fuel usage. Cleaner as compared to coal and oil, not as compared to LPG. LPG and CNG, they're both cleaner versions of hydrocarbons. Okay. Introduces time-bound clearances and unified regulatory framework. Okay, that means getting clearances for distributing piped natural gas. Focus on expanding city gas distribution. For example, many major cities in Haryana and Delhi, they supply piped natural gas. So here, if you ask me what is the difference between piped natural gas, PNG, and CNG, compressed, that auto rickshaws and cars they use. Here the pressure is very high. It's 100 to 200 atmospheric pressure, ATM or bar, very high pressure. That's why there is a chance of explosion. Here in this case, because it's underground, I think it's 10 to 12 bar maximum. Okay. Current natural gas share remains low at 6.2% of the India's total energy mix. So if 100 units of energy is produced, 6.2% comes from natural gas. We need to raise it to 15%. That is the government's target. Natural gas mainly is composed of methane. Advantages: natural gas reduces emissions, cleaner as compared to oil and coal, helps reduce particulate matter, NOx and SOx emissions, enhances energy security, and LNG offers cost advantage for heavy duty transport sector. Okay, so these are the essential advantages that you can note down. Initiatives. What initiatives have already been taken? National gas grid expansion includes eastern and northeastern pipelines. So this, I think it was called Pradhan Mantri Urja Ganga project. So that dealt with mainly the eastern states, eastern or eastern and northern states, for example, UP, Bihar, West Bengal, Odisha, and Jharkhand. Okay, it was called Pradhan Urja Ganga project. Okay, now they're planning to make it pan India across all the major Indian cities. Satat scheme promotes compressed biogas production from waste. Biogas is again methane rich. Okay. Unified tariff ensures fair pricing across distant zones. Indian gas exchange supports transparent gas trading. So these are the steps that have already been taken. Okay. So now what we're planning to do, we're planning to make it pan India. Okay. And this is as per Essential Commodities Act 1955, because I think just a week ago we said that now the government has included natural gas in its essential commodity list. It keeps changing from time to time. Normally we take into consideration vegetables like onion, potato or pulses, but now the situation is so grim that it has been included. Next, March 24th we observed World Tuberculosis Day, and that's why there is a report of India's TB status in India. India planned to eliminate TB by 2025, but now it's 2026. Still, we have not reached that particular target. Okay, this is as per 2030 SDG target. Okay, India was under these targets. India was planning to eliminate TB by 2025, but you'll be surprised to know that 25% of the global cases are found in India. अगर 100 cases से world में 25% cases are from India. But there is a good sign. The number of TB cases has come down. Okay, and this particular report deals with the TB cases in India between 2014 and 2025. And as per the report, 21% reduction in the TB cases, which we'll go through. TB cases reduced by 21% between 2015 and 24. Not sorry, 14 and 25. This particular decade. Okay, TB related deaths declined by 25% in the same period. So number of cases reduced by 21% and death cases were reduced by 25%, but still India accounts for 25% of the global tuberculosis burden. And what are the steps taken? National Tuberculosis Elimination Program. TB Mukt Bharat Abhiyan promotes early detection and support. Nikshay Poshan Yojana, and under that there is this concept of Nikshay Mitra. Okay, so these, because TB is a very debilitating disease, you know, it affects primarily your lungs and it is caused by a bacteria called Mycobacterium tuberculosis. But the treatment is as debilitating as the disease itself. It's a deadly disease, okay, because it weakens you so much and you start taking different types of antibiotics. And now we have more powerful antibiotics because of multi-drug resistance. So the combined effect of the disease and the treatment, it takes a toll on your body. That is why you need physical support as well as mental support. So to provide TB patients with mental support, there is a concept called Nikshay Mitra. That means he will be your companion, or you can say a temporary guardian who is going to help you understand the importance of nutrition, okay, how to keep yourself mentally fit, okay, for that. TB free urban ward initiative. BPALM regimen. This BPALM regimen is actually a 4 antibiotic based approach. So BPALM, these are 4 different types of antibiotics, okay, and they're part of this regimen which will help those patients who have shown multi-drug resistance, especially MDR. The last line antibiotics, okay. So now we also have tools which are AI based, which can easily, you know, gauge or make assessment of chest x-rays, because TB is primarily diagnosed through x-rays, okay. Sometimes x-ray reports can be misleading. That is why we are using AI tools, okay. Tuberculosis is caused by Mycobacterium tuberculosis. The bacteria spreads through air via coughs and sneezes, primarily affects lungs but can impact other organs. There are cases of TB in kidney, bone TB. Bone TB is also, I think, the second most popular form of TB, apart from pulmonary TB, that is your lung TB. TB is preventable and curable with proper treatment, and India aimed to eliminate, but we have missed the target. But we're gradually improving. So now let's take a look at the place in the news, which is Lebanon. And Lebanon is in news because it houses one of the terror groups called Hezbollah, which is totally against Israel. And Israel is planning to expand into Lebanon. As you know, Lebanon is a Mediterranean country which shares border with Syria and Israel. These two countries, okay? This is your Lebanon. This is Israel, this is Syria. So Israel lies to the south of Lebanon, and Israel is trying to enter this territory by crossing the border with Lebanon. That is why it was in the news. So its capital is Beirut. Litani River, this is the river which is in the news. It was trying to get close to Litani River, okay? And this is the major river in Lebanon. And there are two countries with which Lebanon shares border. One is Syria and the other is Jordan. And then to its west lies the Mediterranean, okay? Kornet El Sauda is the highest mountain in Lebanon. I think you need to memorize the name of the river, because that is why it was in the news. Litani River. I don't know how you pronounce it. Blue line is a 120-kilometer temporary line of withdrawal which was set by the United Nations. So there was a peacetime border not properly demarcated, between Lebanon and Israel. So Israel is trying to breach that line, which is called blue line. Okay, so that's it. Let's move to the quick updates. As I mentioned in the beginning, that there was a survey related to unincorporated companies. Corporates, these are registered companies. Some corporates are small corporates, some are big corporates. But corporates is sometimes used for big companies. But any company which is registered and follows the business entity principle is a corporate. That means the owner of the company is not the same as the company itself. Okay, owner ho gaya, and this is your company, this is your individual. These are two separate entities. The loss of the company is not the loss of the individual. So that is the corporate rule. So this is for, I think, commerce students. This is the strict definition, but sometimes we use corporates only for big companies. Okay. Now there was a survey about, and in India we often interchangeably use the word unorganized sector for unincorporated sector. Okay, interchangeably used, because these are those industries or establishments in which there is no registration, no scope for social protection of the workers, okay, but still they're relevant for the growth of the Indian economy. They contribute to India's GDP as well as employment. So let's go through the findings of the survey. First is, it was released by MOSPI, the survey. Unincorporated industry, unlike a corporate, an incorporated entity's owner is not separate from the entity. That means they don't follow the business entity concept. Okay, an important pillar of the Indian economy, contributing significantly to employment generation. Nearly 50 lakhs 75 lakhs new employments originated or developed because of these companies. So okay, between the last 2 years, and between September 2024 and December 2025, that is a span of 2 years, the number grew from 7.34 to 7.92 crore. That means 58 lakhs of establishments which are called unincorporated industries were set up, and they provided employment to nearly 75 individuals. Okay, and as you know, India's GDP or GVA grew by 7 to 7.5%. Okay, and this has been the rate for the past few years. But you can take a look at the GVA of this particular sector. By what percentage they grew? which is close to 11%. Okay, that is why they form the backbone of the Indian economy. They provide employment and contribute to India's GDP. Pension and permanent commission relief to women army officers. So again, the Supreme Court has given a verdict that many women or female officers in the Indian armed forces, they were not fairly treated. Their jobs had to be terminated. Okay, and that is why they were prevented from getting enough the proper benefits. Okay, proper benefit, just like their male counterparts get. So this system of giving early retirement to women or female army officers or armed forces officers is called short service commission. Okay, and if you get all the benefits like a normal pensioner, it's called permanent commission. Okay, but not all the women employees, they qualify for permanent commission. Some actually fail to meet the set standards, and they have to accept early retirement. So that is why the Supreme Court intervened. Not for all the coming such cases, but only for those cases which I think just pension arrears effective from 1st January. Okay, relief for officers. So this is going to be temporary measure and not a blanket verdict or blanket rule for everyone. So pension requires 20 years of service. Only then you are supposed to be eligible for all the benefits that you get as a pensioner. So Supreme Court said no. The criteria set to exclude women has been very harsh. Okay, so there have been cases of misassessment. Okay, that is why they have to get arrears and they have to get all the benefits starting from January 2025. That means close to 15 months. So it granted, permanent commission granted subject to 60% marks plus medical clearance. Only then you'll be qualified. But despite having this benchmark, the assessment was not fair. It didn't say anything about the criteria, but the assessment. Okay, it has been in the favor of males. Males are easily qualified, but women find it hard to meet the set criteria. Court flags biased SER evaluation system. Okay, so this particular SER evaluation is for eligibility of the female armed forces officers. Okay, so that's why they will be getting arrears starting from 1st January 2025. Next is about decade of transformation at BIS. BIS is your Bureau of Indian Standards, which comes under the Ministry of Consumer Affairs, Food Supply. Okay, so the body was established in the year 1986. Again, something very unique. 1986 it was established, but now the old act was replaced by Indian Bureau Standards Act, which is called 2016 Act, if I'm not wrong. Okay, so since then it has been statutory body under the new act, Indian Standards Act 2016. Okay, so because in 2014 Honorable Prime Minister of India announced from the ramparts of the Red Fort that we are going to adopt Make in India. Okay, so that India's manufacturing sector can get a boost. At the same time, we also adopted this concept of zero defect, zero effect, so that the manufacturing standards followed by the MSMEs can be raised. Okay, so since then, how Bureau of Indian Standards has fared. So that is why it was in the news. Okay, so BIS का काम क्या होता है? To maintain and set standards for different products. It also sets standards for gold and other manufacturing products. And then we have AgMark, a separate body for setting standards for agricultural products. Okay, we also have ISI. Okay, so over 10 years of Make in India, zero defect, zero effect, high quality manufacturing with minimal environmental impact. Okay, so that is why it was in the news. 10 years of Make in India. Doctrine of necessity and right to recusal. This is a very important topic, and I think it is as important as, or maybe more important than many of the main topics or main news. Why? Because for the first time, I think the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, he disallowed himself from being a part of the bench. Okay, and normally we allow, or in India, this is allowed for High Court judges and Supreme Court judges to disallow themselves from joining a bench because they fear conflict of interest. If a particular case is being taken into consideration, maybe they have been party to case or their relatives or they know somebody who is involved in that case. That is why they say ki it will be against the morality or judicial ethics. That is why please disallow me from being a part of the bench. That is called right to recusal. Okay, one concept. This right belongs to the judges. Okay, now doctrine of necessity is another doctrine which says if it's very crucial, very important, and a case needs a particular individual, a judge to be part of, because there is no other alternative. There are so many other benches which are involved in other matters. So even if there is this fear of conflict of interest, but still a proper mechanism can be developed in which that particular individual can be part of the bench, even if he has his relatives involved in the case. Okay, that is called doctrine of necessity. Why? It is very necessary to have somebody to have somebody as part of that bench. Okay, so these are two conflicting principles. One says ki the individual should be disallowed. Why? Because he may have some conflict of interest. But doctrine of necessity says ki okay, we can maybe overlook this possibility of conflict of interest. Why? Because individuals have to be part of the bench or there are no other members available. That is why it was in the news. Because India does not have any code that contains the provisions related to right to recusal. Under what grounds or what cases a judge may disallow himself or herself. Okay. So there are unsaid, these are unsaid rules. Unsaid rules, no particular code. So some experts say, what if the particular judge's involvement was required and just to not get into any kind of trouble, he said, I have a conflict of interest, so please disallow me. Okay, this can also be the case. Maybe under political pressure, a particular judge is disallowing himself or trying not to be a part of that bench. Okay, so there is a possibility of that. That is why it was in the news. The doctrine applies when no alternative exists. This doctrine applies, that means there are not many judges available and you have to be a part of that bench. Okay, prevent judicial deadlock. Deadlock means everything comes to a stall. Why? Because there are not enough benches. Balances ethics versus necessity. Important in constitutional cases, raises need for clear recusal guidelines. Okay, that means doctrine of necessity can easily override this principle. If it's very necessary, the individual who is trying to disallow himself or herself has to be included. So it's a very hot topic for GS paper 2. CERN experiments with antiprotons. As you know, CERN is based in Europe and it conducts experiments related to particle physics. Okay, particle physics. So particle physics, which is sometimes interchangeably called quantum physics, but quantum physics is more precise. Okay, what lies within a nucleus. Okay, or the nature of an atom. Because electrons, protons are not visible to the naked eye. They cannot be seen with normal microscopes also. Their behaviors can only be observed. Okay, that is why we use high magnetic field like tunnels, circular tunnels, to rapidly accelerate matter so that there can be collision and some particles can be generated, and that is what led to the discovery of your God particle, Higgs boson. Okay, so it was a part of the research conducted by CERN, which is based in Europe. It sits at the border between France and Switzerland. Okay, now protons are what? These are positively charged particles. So quantum physics says every particle or most of the particles have antiparticles, just like electrons have antiparticles which are called anti-electrons or positrons. Positrons have the same mass but opposite charge, and their counterpart is your electrons, negatively charged. Similarly, protons have antiprotons, same mass but opposite charge, negatively charged, and these are called antiprotons. When the universe began, there were particles and antiparticles. But the scientists are curious to know, how come we see particles only? Matter is made up of particles. Matter, everything that we see around us. But at the beginning, there must be equal number of antiparticles also. So why antiparticles are not evident? The moment they come into contact with matter, they disappear. Okay. So that is why such researches are being conducted, and also they're trying to link gravity with quantum physics, because in a model called standard model, there are three forces, but there is no place for gravity. Okay. So electromagnetic force, weak force, strong nuclear force, but there is no place for gravity. That is why there are so many experiments. Okay. The study of matter antimatter asymmetry. Matter is prevalent, but antimatter is nowhere to be seen. Test standard model limitations conducted in high energy controlled setups and explores gravity effects on antimatter. Okay. So that is why it was in the news. Supreme Court reiterates that scheduled caste status ends after conversion to other religions. So there are three religions. For example, if a particular individual from the scheduled caste community embraced another religion, say Christianity or Zoroastrianism or Islam, they stop being treated as Hindus. Okay, they cannot avail their SC status anymore. Okay, so that is what the Supreme Court said. This is only for the scheduled caste individuals if they embrace any other religion, not ST. Okay, scheduled tribe wala status, this is actually a gray area. Nobody knows if they accept any other religion, will they lose their ST status? This is not mentioned in the presidential orders, which the Supreme High Court of Andhra Pradesh quoted, and then it was upheld by the Supreme Court. Regarding ST, there is no such rule. But SC, if you belong to any of the three religions like Hinduism, Buddhism, and Sikhism, it's okay. Your status is retained. But if you accept Christianity or Islam, your status is gone. Okay, this was the verdict of the Andhra Pradesh High Court, which was virtually upheld by the Supreme Court. And next, the last quick update, which is about InvITs by NHAI. So InvITs is actually Infrastructure Investment Trust. Infrastructure Investment Trust. These are mutual fund like entities. Okay. So what is their origin? Let's understand. The central government deals with two types of projects. One is called greenfield. Greenfield projects वो होते हैं which are fresh projects, absolutely new projects. Then brownfield projects. These are those projects which are either midway or old projects. So the government's primary focus is greenfield, then brownfield. Why? Brownfield projects, maybe the government lost interest in those projects due to lack of viability, okay, or maybe losses. Now if the government wants to renew the projects, again it will have to take loans, and if it takes a lot of loans from different infrastructure funding or lending companies, it will have less money for fresh projects. तो गवर्नमेंट बोला मैं लोन लूंगा या फिर उधारी लूंगा, that will be for greenfield projects. So how to deal with brownfield projects which are lying unused? Let's start taking money from the crowd or the people, normal investors. Okay, that is why they came up with this concept, special purpose vehicles, जिसमें लोग पैसा लगा सकते हैं in brownfield projects. And for example, road, power supply, and whatever revenue is collected, the investors will get back their money. Okay, so first public InvIT by NHI listed on Bombay Stock Exchange. Earlier only institutional investors were allowed. Now normal people can also invest in InvITs, and the money which is pooled through InvITs will be used to run the semi-started projects like roads, highways, and this is because this has been raised by NHAI. This is for highways, and whatever tolls are collected, revenue is generated, it will be shared among the investors. Okay, that is the model. Raises funds without adding debt, कोई उधारी नहीं है. Why? Because the money comes from people. It's just like investment. Provides stable returns to investors, boosts infrastructure financing. So here there is no concept of debtors, कोई उधारे नहीं है. It is like shareholders, investors. Okay, so that is why it was in the news. I think we have reached the end. So now it's time to take the 6 questions which will flash on your screen and try to make the most of VisionIAS digital current affairs. Wish you all the very best.